Okay. So welcome to the webinar. This one is called A Framework for Mentoring Conversations. I'm Rolfe, founder of Mentoring Works. And I think it's interesting that many of us have the role of mentor, but very few are trained in mentoring. However, you can learn to lead a mentoring conversation with the simple and easy to remember framework I'm going to offer you today. And I'll spell it out in this webinar. You'll see it's incredibly flexible. There isn't a one size fits all in mentoring. So we need to have that flexibility to be able to move and change according to the needs of the person we're mentoring and the situation. So we'll talk about that. And using this framework will allow you to be more confident. You'll never have to worry about what do I say, what do I do next, because you'll know, you'll have a framework in your mind. Increasingly, mentoring is integral to a leader's role, and many organisations have mentoring programs. Yet still today, most mentoring happens in your informal relationship as a series of ad hoc meetings or even casual conversations. And you don't even have to have the title of mentor to lead a mentoring conversation, but you do need to understand how to help people create insight and then act upon that. In a work setting, you might use mentoring conversations with individuals to talk about career development, to provide some performance feedback, and in building people's capability and capacity in their workplace. If you lead a team, it's likely you'll use a mentoring style or a mentoring conversation when you talk about goals and outcomes with the team, when you plan or debrief your projects, and when you manage or adapt to change. And then there are what I call mentoring moments. So these may happen with your friends and family, with your colleagues, your peers, or with your employees. And it's where you just see the opportunity and you take that opportunity to turn it into a mentoring conversation or a brief mentoring moment, as I call it. So in this webinar, we're going to be talking about the mentoring dynamic, that is the flexible approaches that you could use in your mentoring relationships and mentoring conversations. And I'll share that mentoring dynamic model with you in just a moment. I'm going to talk about the 4 critical questions, the 4 questions that really are the framework for your conversations, the 4 questions that you keep in your mind to frame up the actual questions that you'll use in that conversation. And then I'm going to give you some examples of leading these mentoring conversations and the different way you can phrase your questions. And I'll be looking for your input and your suggestions about how to use the 4 critical questions in your experience of leading these conversations. So here we go. Our first topic is the mentoring dynamic, because mentoring conversations aren't static. They're not some lockstep formula that you work your way through. Mentoring conversations are dynamic. You need that flexibility to be able to move and change and adjust your approach to what the situation calls for. And I'm going to outline these in this slide. So traditionally, we have thought about mentors as a wise guide, someone who's going to impart, share knowledge and experience. And while that is an intrinsic part of mentoring, it is just that, a part of mentoring. In contemporary mentoring, we've expanded our definition of mentoring, our ideas about mentoring, and we have lots more to bring to the relationship and the conversation. And in fact, I believe the starting point for your mentoring conversation is what I call to elicit. we talked last time about building trust and rapport, creating a safe space. And then when we get into the actual conversation, our task is really to ask questions and listen. We want to elicit or draw the mentee out. We want to get them talking. And at this stage of the conversation, what we want to do is kind of apply that 80-20 principle. We really want, through our questions and our listening, we want the mentee to be doing about 80% of the talking in these initial phases. It might change and balance out a bit more as we continue, but certainly in the beginning, the job is to draw them out, get them talking. So Marie, I hope this is kind of going a little bit to your earlier question, and I'll come back to that question shortly as well. Likewise, in a lot of mentoring, we think about a mentor as someone who supports the mentee. We want to encourage them, validate their thoughts and feelings, let them know they're not alone, and give them that support. It's part of the rapport building that we do to encourage and validate them. We support them. But looking back on your own mentors, even the informal ones, even the ones where the word mentor was not actually mentioned, didn't those mentors not only support you, but also challenge you, give you a different perspective, give you another way of looking at the situation, question your assumptions in that relationship? So when it comes to a mentoring relationship, these are the 4 points. This is the dynamic relationship, and this is what we need to move around and between, because this is not an either or choice. We will both elicit at times and impart, share our knowledge and experience. We will both support and nurture the person, and when we've earned the right, when we have their trust, we can then challenge them, take them out of their comfort zone, take them out of the box of their thinking, and get more creative by giving them the learning that they might need. So I want to ask you a question now. I want you to think about this, and I'm going to give you a poll so that you can anonymously respond. I want you to think about which of these approaches you might need to strengthen in your own mentoring. So is it this area that we call elicit, your ability to listen and ask questions? Is it that supportive, the empathy that you can show to people that actually encourages and validates them? Is it your ability to challenge them, provide that different perspective or different point of view without threatening them, but leading them out of the comfort zone into, because it's only when you step out of the comfort zone then you're actually into the learning zone? Or is it that imparting, like stepping into, okay, I want to share my knowledge and experience when it's appropriate. I want to make suggestions without telling them what to do, but make suggestions, and even perhaps when asked for, give advice. So let me put the poll up now. Let me find my controls here. I'm going to launch poll 1. Here we go. And you can respond. You can choose more than one response to these, but which of these approaches do you need to develop in your own mentoring? Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to, well, perhaps not a couple of minutes, but certainly 60 seconds or so on this. Okay, always takes a bit longer when we've got multiple opportunities to answer. Okay. 10 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm closing the poll now. Hope you've all had a chance to respond. There we go. So I'll share the results here. Okay. So it's interesting that the highest score was actually the challenge to provide that different perspective and a different point of view. So that's quite interesting. And I think that I'm pleased to see that it's the highest one. I do see it's followed fairly closely by elicit, your ability to listen and ask questions. And what we're going to do this year is really focus on the asking of questions. So I've got 4 webinars coming up devoted to asking questions and giving examples of the sorts of questions you can ask with a career development focus. So hopefully you'll stick around this year and join in the webinars. And also, and if you can't join live, perhaps view the recordings. They're up there pretty soon after they go to air, and you can watch them afterwards. All right, thanks for sharing that. Now, the other thing I want you to do, having done this exercise now, some of this should be on your to-do list, on your action plan. So if you've said, okay, I need to improve my ability to, challenge, if that's your number one, then jot that down on your action, because you need to focus on that. That'll be a good learning project for yourself, and maybe something you can engage with some of your peers and kind of do some peer mentoring, reciprocal mentoring here on just how do you meet that challenge to be more challenging. If it's illicit, same deal. So pop it on your actions list. And let me get rid of this and we will continue. Okay, so if you have questions or observations at any time, and I'm just going to go and have a look. Okay, and Marie said earlier, I'd like to learn more about how I can engage my mentees in mentoring conversations better and effectively. So I think the questions is going to be a really important thing for you, both in today's webinar and the upcoming webinars. Marie, come back at the end and we will make sure you've got some answers to that question. So type in at any time if you've got questions. Okay, so I've called this webinar a framework for a mentoring conversation, because it's like when you build a house. See the picture there, there's some trusses, roof trusses there. And it's like when you build a house, you start with a secure foundation, and in mentoring, that's the safe space is the foundation of your mentoring conversation. We talked about that in last month. It's the trust and the rapport. And then you put in place your framework for the walls and the roof of your building. And once the foundation and the framework are there, then you can start building the house, and you can decorate the interior and create a home to suit the people. And that's why I say no two mentoring conversations are the same. And I'd love it if some of you would share your experience of this and your approaches, because they can be very different in my experience, and you need to adjust, but they still have the same framework. They're not going to be identical, but you can use the same framework. So here we go with the 4 critical questions that provide the framework that you can use in pretty much any situation. Now, these questions are not necessarily the questions that are going to come out of your mouth. These are the questions you hold in your mind. And if you can remember 3 out of the 4 of them, you'll never have to worry, what do I say? What do I do next? because it will be some variation of one of these questions that you learn and you hold in your mind. I call them umbrella questions because they kind of are like an umbrella, because underneath those you plan the questions that are right for you and for your situation. So here we go. Here is the framework for a mentoring conversation, and we'll see how those questions actually fit in. So the framework for the mentoring conversation is actually based on adult learning. It's based on the learning cycle, if you like. It's based on classic decision making and problem solving. Okay, I'm just looking at the question coming up in the question box here, and I will get to these in just a moment. So what we're doing is we're working, and I've set it up like an analog clock face, starting at the 12 o'clock position at the top there and working our way around the clock face. I want to acknowledge from the outset that you're not always going to start at 12 and move around. Remember, I said we need to be flexible. The mentoring conversation is dynamic. You need to be able to move and adjust according to the needs and the situation. But for simplicity, I'm going to work through it this time in a clockwise fashion. So what we're trying to do in the first stage between 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock here, we're starting with the current reality. That is what's going on for the person from their situation. And we want them to reflect on that. We want to explore their thoughts and feelings. So we're going to use our rapport building. We're going to use our skills of eliciting, asking questions and listening as we explore with them. And the question that kind of sums up, we hold in our mind, the question that we ask, what we're trying to answer here is, where are you now? So from the mentee's point of view, where are they now? It's question number one. Now, so you might like to, some of you who are very experienced, you might like to share with the rest of the group here some of the questions that you might use in this scenario. So share if you like, you can type them in, and then what happens is each of us will go away with more variations of this "where are you now" question than we might think up. So it's kind of like a bit of an online brainstorming here. So let's see. Okay, I have your message here, Peggy. I will respond to that shortly. So question number one, where are you now? Let's see if you can come up with some alternatives or some variations that suit your situation and that you might have used. I'll continue on and come back and have a look at these in a minute. So as we look at our clock face here, you can see down the bottom there at 6 o'clock, we've got informed decisions. That's where we want to get our mentees to. We want them to make informed decisions about the actions they might take, or indeed things they might stop doing or find ways to do differently. Okay, so Kathy has offered an alternative here to question number one. Tell me about how you see the current situation. Thanks for sharing that, Kathy. Continue typing in your alternatives, and we'll move on to the second part of the conversation now as an overview. And what we want to do here, in order that our mentee can make informed decisions, is to help them generate options and possibilities. And so our question here is, where do you want to be? So having established what's going on for them, what their current situation is, when the time is right, when they are ready, when you feel like you have adequately explored those thoughts and feelings, then you're moving into the second stage. And your question in your mind there is, where do you want to be? So if you've got an alternative suggestion, you can type that in now. So Laurie, hi Laurie. I think this is a question one example from Laurie. What do you struggle with? Okay, it could be what's on your agenda today? What would you like to talk to me about today? Okay, and going back to Marie's question about engaging people, I think you can help yourself by setting up, if you are in a formal mentoring relationship or one that's got a little bit of structure, my suggestion would be you train your mentees from the outset to give you a heads up before you meet. And I'm saying meeting, I realise that much of our mentoring is happening, online now. So meeting is encompassing online meetings or telephone calls or however you have contact with your mentee, but train them to give you a heads up. It can be a text, it can be an email, but just train them to send you, 3 dot points or a bit of an agenda, or what are the questions that you want us to talk about in our next meeting. And if you train them, they're already engaged before you even have your contact, before they walk in the door or before you make the connection online. You already have an agenda. It doesn't have to be a real formal thing, just 2 or 3 points, a single question or topic. And already they're engaged. They have generated this. They've given you the heads up, and that will help you. And you can formulate some questions around that. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm not seeing any more coming in. Okay, so the thing that you probably realise with your questioning technique, so we're not going to go into it in great detail today, is that you're going to be using open questions. Those are the questions that can't easily be answered with a yes, no. Remember, our task is to elicit, to draw them out. We want them to do the talking. So an open question is a who, what, why, where, when type question. Okay, John is saying, what makes you feel confident? Yes, so we want our mentoring to be strengths-based. We want to talk with them about their talents and their strengths, and that's our next webinar, actually. So what makes you feel confident is a good question to get them open, and you can follow that up quite easily with, can you give me some examples of that? You want to, as your listeners, you've asked your question, you then want to use minimal responses. That means some nodding, non-verbal, as well as minimal vocalizing, short questions, follow-up questions. Can you tell me some more about that? Would you like to expand on that? Can you give me an example of that? So minimal responses. Gentle probing questions. So gentle probing, we don't want them to feel like they're being interrogated here. So you can cushion your questions with little prefacing phrases like, do you mind if I ask? Would you like to tell me? And that makes the probing more gentle. Reflective listening, where you paraphrase or repeat back to them what they're saying to you. Now, you don't want to be a parrot. You just need to make this feel natural to them and to you. But reflective listening lets them know they've been heard and also gives them the opportunity to clarify, because the first thing that comes out of your mouth is not necessarily the actual issue. So we want to give them that chance to expand by reflection. They can either confirm, yes, that's exactly what I meant, or they can say, well, actually what I really meant was. And you can also start to, at this, get more information from them. So what you're trying to find out is where are they now and where do they want to be? So you're trying to find out information from them. So if we take that back to our mentoring dynamic, so that information is really about, we want them to make informed decisions. So by definition, they actually need some information on which to base that. That information may come from within them, or it may be that you need to actually send them away to do some more research and get that information. Or if you really feel it's appropriate, that information in some cases may come from you. So this is where we move in the mentoring dynamic that we looked at before, from elicit to impart. If it's appropriate, then you might start to share briefly some of your knowledge and experience with them so that they have the benefit of that too. So again, we're moving around this framework for the mentoring conversation. We started with their current reality. We explore their thoughts and feelings by asking some variation of where are you now? Getting them to reflect on what's going on. We're leading them towards making informed decisions for themselves. So our main question, the umbrella question, the question we hold in our mind to frame up appropriate questions is, where do you want to be? And then we're going to move on again. We don't rush this, we take our time. And I should have said earlier too, although I'm talking about a or the mentoring conversation, in reality, this could be a series of conversations over time, but we are leading them towards deciding their goals, creating actions and plans. So what do you think the third question, the general question you hold in your mind, the umbrella question, if you like? We've got, where are you now? Where do you want to be? We're going to move them towards action. And so our third question, how might you get there? Now, I don't want to be prescriptive about the words you use, far from it. I want you to use these and hold on to them, but actually to build your own repertoire of questions, have your own toolkit, your own vocabulary, your own words that are comfortable for you and the people that you're mentoring. But I do want to point out in this case, the word might. It's not definite. It's, what I'm trying to do with that word is get across the message that if you ask a question like, well, how might you get there? They might come up with the first thing that comes into the head. And our job, remember, is to create options and different ideas. Remember, we also want to challenge them. So the first idea is not always the best idea. This is why we use brainstorming, So how might you get there allows them to come up with a possible course of action and yet still have all other alternatives. Okay, that's one course of action. So what might be another approach to that? And this is particularly useful because, remember, we want them to make informed decisions. We're saying as a mentor, we can have some input to that. And they might come up with a course of action that you see all the red flags in the world. You just predict danger ahead if they take that course. So you want them not to be too fixed or rigid about their plan. You want to be able to, if need be, have them go away again and do some research, to go away and think about this and brainstorm some ideas. You might even suggest, let's brainstorm together some different approaches and see what we can pull out of that before we lock in. So that word might is quite important. So go ahead and type in, lovely. So Brenda, what might be your next steps? Yeah, that's a lovely way of phrasing it. And again, different, if you're within an organization, different organizations have different sort of buzzwords and terminology that they use. And it's quite appropriate to use that kind of language in your mentoring conversations as well. So if you'd like to type in some alternatives for question 3. So the fourth stage of this conversation is going to be follow through and adjustment. Now, this one definitely will be a later date. You might get to the point where, as Brenda says, what might be your next steps? or how might you get there, or whatever your version of that is. And you might, okay, Kathy's saying, what avenues have you considered so far? That's great, a great question too, because it might be some combination. You know, when we talk about creative thinking is often a combination of different ideas. What worked, what didn't work. So we might be looking at a whole range of things there. So the fourth part of this model is likely to be a follow-up conversation when they've actually gone away and taken some action. And it might be good before they go away, if they have got some firm, if you've got to the point of, yes, we've got a firm plan that's quite realistic, and you know, you've looked at the risks and so forth, and this looks like it could work, you might help them by saying, okay, so what's your first step, or what's your next step, or what do you think you will do before we actually get together and chat again? So that kind of commits them to what they're going to do next. And that will give you, and to Marie, you want to know how to engage people. If they know you are expecting them to have something to report back to you about, they're going to be more engaged. So remembering that the follow through and the adjustment is a follow-up conversation. The fourth question is some version of, okay, how are you doing now? Or what happened since we last met? Or, okay, you said that last time that you're going to do X, Y, and Z. Were you able to do that, and how did it go? Okay, and you're off and running. So that essentially is the framework for the mentoring conversation. It is detailed in the book. You can take a screenshot of that quickly before I move on to the next slide. Okay, I'm just looking at the questions that are coming in. Okay, so there you have the 4 umbrella questions. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? How might you get there? How are you doing? I hope you've got those jotted down, and perhaps you can generate some other options, because I'm going to give you some activities to do in just a moment, where you'll be using your alternatives for these questions. So right now I'm going to move into, I'm not seeing any additional questions. So I'll pause again shortly. Do type them in if you've got some. I'll pause again shortly, but I want to move now into, okay, we're good on time, some practical applications where you're leading a mentoring conversation in various situations. Generally, career development is the #1 purpose of mentoring in the workplace. That's why I wrote the book, but there are other applications that we're going to look at now, and I'm interested in which of these apply to you. So sometimes you can use mentoring in performance feedback. You can certainly use it in capability development, so developing their talents and skills, developing their abilities. You can definitely use it, as I mentioned before, with your teams, if you're leading a team, for team outcomes. Project debrief for continuous, so planning and debriefing your projects. Then there's mentoring moments. So I'm going to talk about each of these. But before I do that, I'm interested in what your most likely use is. So let me bring up another poll here, and you can choose multiple answers to this poll. So which of those are you, where do you see those for yourself when you're leading mentoring conversations? So just, you can choose more than one response. And if there's other applications, practical applications that you're using that don't fit in those categories, you can tick the other, and please type in and share. I'd love to know what sort of other applications, and I'm sure your colleagues online will want to see that too. Okay, just waiting to give you a chance to respond. If you've ticked the other, can you please share with us what, apart from career development, where you see yourself most likely to be leading mentoring conversations? Okay, so everyone's had a chance to respond, I think. Okay, I'm going to end it now and share the responses with you. Okay, and I just see Liz has responded, managing stressful environments. Yes, and I think we've all had a big dose of that in the last couple of years, haven't we? I had one manager who told me that he has incorporated much more of a mentoring style into his leadership style, managing his team remotely. He was doing kind of pastoral care a lot more, and a mentoring approach, and there was a lot more reciprocal and peer mentoring going on as people adjusted to the isolation issues and around working remotely, which a lot of people are still doing. Okay, Peggy's doing personal development, and Kathy, health and wellbeing areas. Okay, I still think these will be applicable to you. Okay, so we've got a lot of capability, and the majority, the one that stood out is the mentoring moments informal. Okay, thanks for that. So please share your insights as we go through. I'm going to put that away now, and we're going to start with, I've got examples of each of these, I think, with some questions, and I really would value your input as we go through for alternative to those 4 questions. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to say about performance feedback, and I have run whole webinars on feedback, but not doing that today, just a brief overview, is that there are 3 types of feedback you can give. Firstly, affirming feedback. So that's positive feedback. People need to know they're doing the right thing. Even your best, if you're leading a team, even your best performers need to get that positive feedback that lets them know they're on the right track, that gives them that affirmation and appreciation so that they will keep doing. And your not so great performers, you need to have your eagle eye out for when they do something. I mean, the old expression from, I'll find the reference in a moment, was catch them doing something right. I think it was in the one, Ken Blanchard, in the 1 Minute Manager. Catch them doing something right and give them the positive feedback that affirms them and lets them know that you want them to keep doing that. And it makes it more likely that they will. You do need to give corrective feedback. You need to let people know when you want them to do something differently. It's not fair to complain about people not doing their job or not doing their job the right way or acting in inappropriate ways, you know, even in your personal life. You can't expect people to change what they do if they have no idea that what they're doing is inappropriate. Now, you have to decide, obviously, when it's appropriate for you to be giving that corrective feedback. But if it's affecting you, then don't expect change if you're not letting them know. So corrective feedback is important. The interesting thing is that the more you give affirming feedback, the more likely people are to listen to you when you do need to give that correcting feedback. And the final type of feedback that's really useful is reviewing. Now, you can do this one-on-one or with a team, and it's when there is agreement between you and the other person or the team that we can do better here. This is kind of the continuous improvement, and it is a process of collaborative. Let's look at the situation and let's see how we can do better. The other thing I just need to say about this model is based on decades of research into positivity, and you've probably heard me mention Barbara Fredrickson's book on positivity and a lot of the other go-to books on my bookshelf and probably on yours as well, about positivity. And the research tells us that we need more positivity in our lives. That's quite difficult when times are tough. But when it comes to performance feedback, for people to thrive and flourish, for individuals and teams in the workplace, we need at least 3 times the positive feedback to negative feedback or corrective feedback. Now, it's not as hard as you might think. Positive feedback can be as simple as a smile, as simple as eye contact, as simple as the words thank you or I appreciate that. It can be things in the workplace like, bringing cakes or snacks or something into the workplace as a thank you for the team. That is a little dose of positivity that can make a difference. And we need at least 3-to-1 ratio of positivity to negativity. So I do urge you to look for ways to bring more positivity into the workplace. It'll benefit you as well as others. Okay, so performance feedback. I've talked a little bit about that. So now I'm going to give you an example of capability development. So I want your input here. I'm going to put some examples of possible questions you might use. They're variations of question 1, where are we now? Question 2, where do we want to be? Question 3, how do we get there? Or question 4, how are we doing after some action has taken place? I'm just going to put them up, and I want you to type in which of these examples you think they are. Are they a 1, 2, 3, or 4? We don't need to get too hang up on right answers. I just want you to see how this can work with some alternative questions. So here's my first example. What is the gap between desired and actual performance? So we're talking about a capability development. We've recognized there is a desired performance and there is an actual performance, and we want to close that gap. So we've asked the question, what is the gap? We're trying to identify it. So let's have a look. What do you think? Yeah. So Kathy and Laurie are saying it's a 2. Yep. I think it's certainly defining that there's a desired performance and an actual. So we're saying, well, where do we want to be? So it would be a 2. I wouldn't object to it being called a 1 because we're trying to establish it's could be a little bit of both. I'm happy with either responses to that. Just want you to see how you can use this. So example B might be, how might they acquire? So how might you acquire some knowledge and skills and experience that will help you close that gap? What's that? Is it a 1, 2, or a 3 or a 4? Yeah, most people are saying it's a 3. Okay, what's the time frame to close the gap? What do you think that is? Yep, I would say it depends on context. And as I said, I'm not getting hung up on right or wrong answers here, but this is a question you want to include in your repertoire. Remember, we don't just want to talk, we actually want them to commit to action. And having a time frame, nothing commits people or engages people more than knowing there's a time frame, or some people call it a deadline. Okay, and what will you do before we meet next to move towards? Okay, now here's a question that shows that you're being a mentor here. You're not just being directive, you are actually being an assistance and a support to them. What support would you need? And remember that support, and they may not know the answer to that question, and that's okay, because you can share with them, you can impart, you can be there for them yourself as a resource. You might point them towards their peers their colleagues. You might point them towards training courses and other resources that are available to them. Yeah, I see that as a 3. How do we get there? What specifically will they do when? Yes, Asada, I agree. It's a 3-4, depending on what stage. Laurie says 3-4. Yep. Okay, what specifically? Remember, we want them to commit to some action. So that's probably, again, the 3 category. What results could we expect when? What results could we? Now, I actually see this as a 2. I popped it in there to show you we don't always go, continue 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes we go back and forth. So this one swings back to a 2. This is a where do we want to be? What results could we expect when? Or you could see it as a 3 as part of the action plan. I'd be happy with that. Okay. When will we review progress? Maybe this is a kind of a 3, inferring that there's the 4 coming. We want them to be motivated to act, and they need to know we'll be reviewing this. This isn't just a one-off conversation. This is a development conversation. So we want them to have a plan and action that plan. Okay. Any questions or comments you can type in. Any examples you can also type in. Here's another one. This is for team goals and team outcomes. So I'm envisaging this. We've got a group of people in our team that we're working with, and we're using a mentoring approach as we lead this conversation. Sample A, how does what we do reflect the vision and mission of the organisation? Is that a 1, 2, 3, or 4? Okay. Laurie's saying a 1. I'd agree with that. It could be, depending again on context, it could be a 4. Okay. But it's a good question to have to kind of be part of your conversations with your team. I'm using this as a sample of how you can use a mentoring approach and these 4 questions in your conversation. What are our team goals? What are our team goals? So that looks as though that falls into, John was saying a 4 for that too. So B, I think, is probably a 2, as Laurie has said, and John's saying a 2. How is the team performing in our key result areas? Okay, I'd go back to a 1. And again, this is showing you, you don't necessarily go 1, 2, 3, 4 all the time. You can go to 2 and then you can go back to a 1. Now, what are our individual roles in achieving these? I put this question in because I've worked with lots of teams who've told me they didn't understand what other people's roles were. Oh, I didn't know that's what you did. I didn't know. So if we're working as a team, by definition, a team work together, we need to understand the roles and positions of people and how we can achieve our goals together. Okay, good. And what's our plan going forward? Okay, I think that's going to be a 3. When and how will we review? Okay, again, suggesting this is not just a one-off conversation. This is the way we're going to have this is going to be on our team meeting agenda from now on. Okay, now I quickly want to share with you the idea of the project debrief for continuous improvement. So this is an idea that was shared with me, or a process, in fact, that was shared with me for a very long time. Love you to type in your suggested questions here, changing it up a bit here. Your examples of where are we now, where do we want to be, how do we get there, or how are we doing type question. I met a project manager many, many years ago. He was responsible for multi-billion-dollar construction projects, and he had a reputation, he and his team, for bringing them in on time and under budget, which is pretty rare. And I asked him about how he achieved that. He told me that his team, when a project was finished, they'd always have a team celebration. They'd light up the barbecue, have a celebration. But on a separate occasion, and he trained his team. They knew to expect that. The key people would come in and they'd have a room full of flip chart paper, that sort of thing. And that together they would have a non-threatening review of the project. So the project debrief was one where they talked about what went well and what did not. They talked about it objectively. There was no praise, no blame. So no praise for the great work that different people might have done, and neither was there any blame. It was just an objective discussion. If there was a need for praise or responsibility to be taken, those conversations were held elsewhere individually by the project manager. But in this review, there was no praise or blame. So some samples of questions you have used or you might use would be good in this instance, looking for those to be typed in. Okay, we're just closing in on our deadline, so I'm going to keep moving. If you're typing something in, I'll come back and look at that in a moment, because I finally want to talk about this idea of mentoring moments. A lot of you are using this type of conversation. It's informal. It's where you see the opportunity while you're possibly doing something else with the individual, and you seize the opportunity to have a conversation that maybe creates insight. So what you're going to do, it can also be a bit of a feedback situation where you notice and acknowledge what's going on. And through your questions and your listening, you encourage the mentee to actually reflect for themselves. This is a check-in, not a check-up. You're checking in with people. You're letting them know that you're paying attention to them and you want to know how they're going in this situation. You're also there to offer support to them, that encouraging and validating, that empathy. And you can, if need be, use it as an opportunity to guide and correct, as I say, using that feedback. So that is the mentoring moment. It happens in the workplace, it happens in the home, it happens in sport or your day-to-day activities elsewhere. So it's just an extension of a normal conversation that you might have. So that's the end of my content today. I'll come back with questions. We have talked about the mentoring dynamic and how important it is to be flexible and develop each of those approaches for ourselves so that we can move and have that flexibility. We talked about those 4 critical questions. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? How might you get there? And how are you now? And gave you some practical examples of those situations. I'd love to know what your key takeaways are, and particularly actions that you might take. So you can type those in if you wish to share, either to the group or to just to me if you prefer. That's quite fine. Okay. And I will come back for your questions. Just a reminder, I've had to shuffle some of the dates, so you will have had notification if you've already registered, and you will get invitations if you have, if you've been watching live. If you're watching the recording, please subscribe to my newsletter, so you'll get on the list and you will get invitations to these webinars as well, and other information that you'll find useful. And okay, and I'll be sending some information about this and the other 2 books, one that is out now and one that is on its way. I'm thinking that next month it'll be, the 3rd one will be available, but for now you can get hold of these copies. All our webinars this year are based on this particular book. So let's go back to some of the questions. Okay, we're coming up to the top of the hour, so if you have to go, that's fine. I'm going to look back at some of the questions that were asked. I'm also looking for your own actions and key takeaways. I will stick around after this point and answer any more questions for people that are on the line. Okay, okay. Thanks, Peggy. Stick around. I'm going to go back to your question. Okay. Thanks, John. Okay, yes, the 80-20 principle is one that I do promote quite a lot. It does vary, you know, there is flexibility. It might be 70-30. It could get to the point of 50-50 at some point, but I just want you to keep in mind, especially in the initial phases, 80-20. Am I talking too much? Am I asking enough questions? Am I getting enough engagement from the mentee? So thanks for mentioning that. Thanks, Kathy. Okay, all right. And Kathy said here, her key takeaway is be more prepared to challenge, play devil's advocate. You know, sometimes you can actually frame it that way. It may be easier and actually say, hey, I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say blah, blah, blah. And that way, it's a phrase we mostly know. Or you can put it a different way. I just want to pose an alternate view of that. Or I get that's the way it looks to you. Can I just share with you how other people might view it in a different way? So again, using your cushions and asking permission to have some input here. But there's some of the ways you can actually challenge people. I'm going to make a note of that because a lot of you said that, and in not my next book, but the book after, maybe I'll write some more about how to challenge people. So thanks for that input. Listen more, and so Asad is saying key takeaways, listen more and framework for umbrella. Keep Brenda saying a check-in, not a check-up. Okay, and a lot of that just comes from your non-verbal communication, you know, the tone of voice, as well as the way you frame your questions. Okay, now let me just go back because I want to make sure, Marie, did your question get answered about getting more engagement? And I know engagement and getting the mentee to talk more can be more challenging in some cultures. I know a lot of my friends from the Philippines have told me how difficult it is, especially if you're in a more senior position, to your mentee, to actually get them to open up. I still suggest get them to generate the agenda, the topic, the question, a couple of key points that they want to, and they're going to be more engaged. Having a good repertoire of questions appropriate to that person. And then even staying silent, or even being really open and say, hey, you know, I want you to be more, I want you to drive this mentoring relationship more. I want this to be about your issues and your concerns. And for that to happen, you need to be talking more, and then I can respond more appropriately. So there's some of the ways. Now I just want to go back. I didn't have time. Okay. Okay, I see, Peggy, that you are actually dealing with teenagers. I've only done a little work with teenagers. Okay. Okay, I'm just reading your comments in more detail here, Peggy. Are you still on the line? Okay, so Peggy, hang around and we'll have a bit of a chat. Okay. Just looking to see if there are other questions. Okay. 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 Okay, I'm just going to stop the recording now. I will stick around if you have more questions. Otherwise, I'm going to end the webinar, except Peggy, you hang on.